Hello, this is Peter Schuster, and today I want to talk with you about aesthetics in product design, specifically how to use the shape, colors, textures, the feel, the smells of your products to appeal to potential consumers. So let's take a look at a couple examples first. How does this chair make you feel? Does it give you, do you have a comfort reaction to that? Does it look good? Do you enjoy that? What about this chair? You want to jump right into that and snuggle up with a good book? How about these chairs? They give you some sort of feeling, right? What do you suppose the designer wanted you to feel when they designed this chair? All of these things are the aesthetics of a product. Fundamentally, those are all chairs. They serve the same basic function. The difference between them is the appearance, the feel of them, and how you are affected by that. Aesthetics basically are the way that a design looks, feels, sounds, smells, tastes, basically how it relates to your senses. Typically, aesthetics will elicit an emotional reaction in a person. And often the aesthetics are the deciding factor for many purchases. Let me say that again. Aesthetics are often the deciding factor for many purchases because so many products deliver similar functionality. We usually rely on our emotional response to a product to make that final decision. And so most consumer products are driven by the aesthetics. So aesthetics are really critical for product design. We're going to focus today mainly on the visual aesthetics of a product. And there are some good tools out there from the art and design world that we can use for this. You can basically talk about, break visual aesthetics into two categories, the elements of art and the principles of design. Within the elements of art, we're talking about the basic building blocks of visual aesthetics. And these are always going to be present in designs, but you can choose to use them well or not, and you will get a different effect from that. The principles of design will build up with those elements to get a bigger impact in your final product. So the principles allows you to get a holistic response, incorporating the aesthetics in your product. Let's look at what these are. So the elements of art are the lines, shapes, form, color, value, space, texture, and composition of your design. Now, these come from the world of art, so they're often defined in terms of classical works of art. But today, I'm going to look at how these appear in products that have been designed. Principles of design, again, takes those elements and combines them together in various ways. So we look at unity, variety, balance, contrast, emphasis, proportion, rhythm, and movement. Now, I'd like to step through each one of these and just give you a few product examples to see how these elements and principles come into play in product design. We'll start out with line. Lines are designed or are used in product design to create emphasis, attention to specific things, direction, or perhaps misdirection. Lines can be intentionally created using a variety of different methods. They can simply be drawn on, obviously, but more often they are lines created by two surfaces or textures meeting, as in the case on the top there with the car seat. Lots of lines there just by the stitching or by two different fabrics meeting. It can be colors meeting in the case of this toaster, producing the lines, and it's conveying some message. Lines can invoke a feeling. So some examples from airplanes. Take a look at this sometime. Different airlines have different schemes with their lines. In this case, these two, two different United planes have a similar longitudinal line, but then the newer plane has the pattern on the tail to introduce some additional reaction. When we're talking about pattern, you can go more radical. This Song airline tries to break up the overall airline or airplane look with the swoopy lines. American Airlines, again, similar to the United plane with the longitudinal, but now we have the three lines together, the red, white, and blue. And again, remember this chair example. This is a perfect example of a line attempting to convey a specific feeling. There are some other interesting things about lines. They can cause misinterpretation. So here's an example from the automotive industry. Here's a Dodge Dakota, and here's the steering wheel shown there, slightly misaligned. Does that make you feel uncomfortable? Are you bothered a little bit by that? A lot of customers are. Here's another Chrysler product, the Dodge Ram, and a slightly different shape of the line at the hub of the steering wheel there. When it's at the same amount of misalignment, it's not quite as disturbing for most people. And if you look at the data collected on the customer complaints that came through, the Dodge Dakota had a higher number of customer complaints for minimal tilt in the wheel. Now, I should mention the minor tilt in the wheels here have no impact on the performance of the vehicle. It is simply a minor misalignment during the assembly process. The overall performance of the vehicle is entirely correct. It's just that the steering wheel isn't perfectly aligned relative to the rest of the car. And as a result, with the Dakota, with a firm line there, it's very easy to read that misalignment and you're going to get complaints from it. So that's something to think about with your lines. Use them appropriately and try to use them in a way that you won't disturb someone when there's a misalignment. Let's move on to the next one, shape. Shape is the 2D geometry captured by your design. And there are two types of shapes we typically talk about, organic shapes or geometric shapes. And of course, I'm going to be showing you consumer products, so these are three-dimensional objects. But if you look at the silhouette, that's often where we're trying to capture a shape. And of course, you can't really talk about silhouettes unless you talk about the Volkswagen Beetle. This is a classic silhouette, and you can see how it has changed over time. Water bottles are another classic example of a geometric shape that has been adapted and is kind of iconic in view. Let's move on to form. So form takes the shape to the next level. It's the 3D shape of an object. For many designs, the form is closely linked to human factors. The classic Coke bottle, it's an iconic image now, and it's got some ribs on there that kind of have a neat feel on the hand, but it also gives you a little bit of gripping ability of that. And the size of the bottle is determined by the size of a typical hand. So there's human factor relationships there. Similarly, there's this small handheld lamp that again is designed to fit comfortably in the hand and direct light downwards so it doesn't shine up to your face. It also, of course, relates to specific feelings. And the Nissan Cube there generates feelings, right? There are plenty of people who really despise the look of that vehicle because it is different. And some people absolutely love it because it seems like it is maximizing usable space. So these are things that you can do with the shape of an object. These are three very different examples. And obviously you can do this with any sort of form for the 3D shape. Moving on, let's talk about color. There's a lot we can say about colors. Colors are often used to allow a user to customize their environment. So for most products, you can buy them in different colors and a consumer can choose which color they want. Colors also can convey a mood. So you can use standardized colors to get the mood that you want in a particular design. Some colors have cultural meanings that you can take advantage of. For instance, if you want to grab someone's attention, orange or red and sometimes bright yellows are great colors to use for that. But that might get a little bit old for someone after a while to constantly have their attention grabbed. White is often associated with purity. Silver, gray, or black is more industrial. And these have connotations. And psychologists have gone some way to capture this for us. The psychology of color has been captured. This is a really neat chart I got. You see the link on the bottom there. That associates certain goals that you might have with advertising with the color choice, as well as the value and the saturation of that color or chroma. Colors can be used to get different reactions. They can calm a person, they can promote excitement or aggression. And certain colors appeal more or less to men, women, children. And obviously between these two bedroom scenes, there's a different theme here, right? The upper one is almost certainly a children's bedroom and the lower one is an adult's bedroom. So these are some things that you can dive into when using colors. Let's talk about some of the other elements though. Value. Value is the intensity or the lightness or darkness of a color. And it's very interesting to me. Value can be used to convey a mood just by the lightness or darkness. It can also be used to hide or highlight features. So you can have one color, but vary the lightness of it in a certain area, or make it a little bit darker in an area to hide an edge that you don't want to be obvious, like a hidden door, something like that. But one of the surprising things to me is the research shows that brighter colors, lighter colors, have a tendency to make people think that they are bigger. So you can actually change the apparent size for someone by changing the value or intensity of your color. Looking onto space. Space is the use of gaps between features in your design that give some feeling of depth or complexity. The top here, we've got a hanging lamp, lots of holes in there, creating some space. You know that there's an interior volume where the bulb is that has its own space. At the bottom are some interesting trays. On the left there is the something you can use for a party, have various objects placed out in it, and they're separated by what looks like mountain views. And then the cutting boards over on the right separate different regions within them, again, using space. Texture. Texture is, now this is interesting because texture is obviously a tactile thing, but we're talking about visual elements. So here, I mean the visual apparent feel of a surface. We'll talk about texture briefly at the end of this, about when we consider the tactile elements. But something can look soft, like the sort of oddly shaped lamp in the upper right there, or rough, like the cork style chair, or bumpy, like the lamp. The lamp in particular is not designed to be touched, but it still conveys that texture information. And lastly on the elements is composition. Now, composition is really about how you organize these other elements together. And the principles of design are another whole series of tools that we can use to organize them. So I'm going to go right into the principles rather than talking about composition on its own. First principle is unity, sometimes called harmony. And it's the use of similar elements throughout your design. Like the example here, the two different types of blenders have a very common theme, and even within them, lots of circles going on, a basic cylindrical pattern through everything. Unity can convey a sense of purpose, order, and meaning, which can be very, very useful to you. Again, example here of a chair and the footstool that goes with it, matching up very well. Pulling things together, creating harmony within them. Let's talk about variety. Variety is kind of the opposite of harmony. You use different elements throughout the design. So this controller here, two large round surfaces, but then a whole bunch of little small, more complicated things off to the side. That's giving you some visual variety. A couple other examples of that, scissors or wire brushes, things that are really they're kind of sharp and hard, and yet the handles for them are made very organic to partly for human factors, because they're easier to hold that way, but also a little bit artistically to offset the hardness or sharpness of it. That can convey excitement or complexity. It can also simply provide a little bit more calming influence. If you have something, if you have some sort of tool or piece of equipment that is somewhat hard, you want to make it somewhat soft when someone interacts with it. So that's variety. Let's talk about balance. Balance is just basically the idea of using similar elements throughout your design, left to right, top to bottom. Three common types of balance are symmetry, asymmetry, and radial symmetry, or radial balance. So the, I don't remember the name of it. It's one of the routers shown there on the bottom left. Certainly does not need to be a symmetric design. Some element of symmetry is probably good for the antennas, but it's not, doesn't need to be that shape. That was chosen for the aesthetic value. Similarly, the asymmetry of the monitor shown on the right, we know structurally as engineers, it'd be far better to have two supports on that rather than one. You get some protection in case something breaks. On the other hand, there's a lot of neat feeling you get from having that offset support. And radial symmetry, this is just a clock with a decoration about it, but it demonstrates that idea. It doesn't have to be fully uniform, but you're capturing sort of some symmetry all the way around a circular object. Let's talk about contrast now. This is sort of the opposite of balance. You have opposite elements for specific effect. like colors, dark colors with light colors, or soft or organic shapes with hard or sharp shapes. And that can create some complexity in your design, which can be a good thing or it can be an annoying thing. You need to be careful how you're using contrast. Contrast is often used for emphasis, which is the next principle. So emphasis is the difference between the elements being used specifically to call some attention to something. And emphasis can be achieved through any of the elements, color, shape, size, contrast, so on, or principle. So for example here, using color for those e-stop buttons, that's very important. And it's one of those societal conventions, as well as industrial conventions, that bright red is stop. And we know what to do when we see that. It doesn't even say push right here. You just know you're going to push it. Similarly, yellow used on the handles of the tin snips there is telling you grab here, not the other end. The Audi shown here with the headlight pattern, that's using a shape to draw your attention to those lights. They didn't need to do that shape. And the bright yellow there on the wheel, grabbing your attention that there's your wheel on the mouse. You need to emphasize things sometimes just for interest, right? We don't need to really identify where the wheel is on the mouse. But other times for specific purposes to call attention, so someone uses that for, again, human factors. Let's look at proportion. Proportion is a size relationship between different elements in your design. So the Fibonacci series, the spiral here, the golden ratio, if you've heard those terms, is often used to get an appropriate proportion between objects. And as you can see on the right, the old iPod had that sort of size ratios built into it. But what I think is also interesting is the same thing applies with cars. If you look at the two vehicles shown on the right, the ratio between the bottom edge of the vehicle up to the the height of the windows is half of the height of the metal part of the door. And as an example on the Mini there, 3 wheels fit in between the 2 actual wheels. Those proportions look good to us. We're used to that. It's appealing. When you break those proportions, so you can do that for effect, but you have to be careful with it because it can make people uncomfortable when proportions don't match with their expectations. Let's talk about rhythm real quick. Rhythm is that use of a pattern or a repetition to create some continuous feel. So I'll start with on the far right there. The faucet uses that same curve. So you've got consistency there. You might even call that unity as well. Rhythm is usually more than just 2. The fitness tracker, having the pattern all the way across the surface, that's a rhythm tool. The building up at the top, repeating its basic shape. I kind of like this toilet paper roll holder, but it's got those curves, a continuous curve repeating there. That's the idea of using rhythm. And then finally, movement. It's using elements in your design to either convey a sense of motion, perhaps like this chair or the teapot shown there, or it can be a way that you use elements to direct attention. Now, this is also an illustration of contrast on both of these. The top one there is a bedside table, and it can expand in height, and that's what the yellow indicates. It's pointing out for me, it's pointing out there's motion going on there, but it's also calling attention to that. That's an area where you might have a pinch point, for example. On the lower left, a sort of classic drill look, you can see the red button or trigger to actuate the drill. And we typically use that color to highlight, okay, here's where the trigger is. But also the pattern of the horizontal stripes and then the gripper on the handle indicates a little bit of motion there. It's like we're moving this way. So that's an example of motion. Let's talk about the other senses. So in particular, tactile. I don't have a lot that I want to go through with tactile aesthetics, but I just want to point out that when you are making a physical product, as we are, this is mechanical engineering that we're talking about here, the texture of the surface, the shape, the weight, or the density of the product, the balance, physical balance of the product, the comfort, way it feels, so that might be the softness of the surface. the temperature, which has to do with the material at the surface as well. Does it vibrate? That can be good or bad. Does it have some sharpness to it? These are some examples of material aesthetics that can make a big difference when you have a physical product. Often these tactile aesthetics are closely related to human factors. So for instance, the shape, weight, comfort of a handle is closely related to the ergonomics of that handle. But it's not always that way. Sometimes things are simply sized so that they feel good in the hand, not because it influences the ability to use it, but just because it's nice. So you can't forget about tactile aesthetics. I'm not going to go into any more detail on that. It's mainly about make a prototype, get the proportions right, and see how it feels. Show it to other people, get their reactions to that. And I also want to point out that beyond vision and touch, there are your other senses: sound, taste, and smell aesthetics. So, for example, the new car smell. This is a thing, right? People talk about that. My car has the new car smell. Or did you notice this? What this product has? It kind of smells a little bit oily. If you slam a car door and it sounds a little tinny, that's not a good thing. The whiny engine noise or a rumbling noise. Sound in particular can convey a lot. If you pick up a product and you're expecting it to be solid and you feel a little bit of a rattle inside of it, you're going to assume it's broken, right? So you need to take some care with the other senses as well. Mechanical engineers designing consumer products don't often get involved with taste, but certainly if you're working in anywhere in the food industry, then taste is another critical aesthetic that you're dealing with. Okay, so just wrap this up. I just want to say that designers use all of these to improve the appeal of their product. The elements of art, the principles of design, and then the other senses. All of these things are used to our best advantage